Alrighty, hello everybody. So first of all, we are going to be skipping through a crap load of stuff here at the very start. Now, I should explain real quick that, this is for the sake of everyone's sanity. The long and short of it is that, this was about 2.5 hours of just straight grind and not a whole lot else. Essentially, the only interesting bit from this whole initial section was this bit over here with Howling Hills. So if you didn't know, the earliest point that you can actually go in and get a Swordmaster is going to be the Howling Hills. That's basically the lower branch of the at the right side of Rampa there. If you get to the very end, there's essentially like two to three Swordmasters that can spawn in there, and they each have a chance to drop Swordmaster marks. Now, the thing is, seemingly on casual runs, they'll end up dropping pretty much every single friggin' time right away. I don't know what it is. The last few challenge runs I've tried here, they've just repeatedly trolled me over and over and over. And so in this particular instance, it ended up taking me... Hell, I don't even know. It took me absolutely ages to get through this whole part. I ended up going through multiple times, essentially just kind of going and taking a bunch of risky approaches through the fight, hoping to see if they might end up at least dropping a bag, because I didn't really feel like going and doing the entire lower part of Rampa all over again. But yeah, it was a pretty annoying process, but eventually I ended up finding out what was needed. So yeah, if you're ever wondering how to go about handling that part in a solo run, the long and short of it is, if you end up taking the upper route, and this kind of just applies to any time you're having trouble with this map for any particular reason, if you end up taking the upper route, you'll end up having a lot more space to work with, a lot more space to retreat and all that kind of thing. Never ever take the bottom route, just because you end up getting pelted from above, not to mention you end up in sort of an open area. Now, this particular map ends up getting used twice in Rampa. This is definitely the easier version. For this one, you're just basically stuck in the middle. You have the option of where exactly you want to go from the very start. You have the upper hand on some units on the right. Sometimes they come in and they try to go for shadow binds and all that kind of thing, which can be a little bit annoying. But for the most part, it's a relatively easy map. The knights are probably the toughest thing a good bit of the time, and the ninjas tend to be just more of an annoyance. They don't tend to be as strong as they can be here. The Dragoons and Terror Knights usually just fold right over, and the Swordmasters are friggin' weak as hell, because that's kind of their whole lot in life, unfortunately, in this version. It's bizarre. That's kind of one of those things that the PSP remake made a little bit confusing. Because, in the original games, both the Swordmaster and Dragoon were like friggin' top-tier mega beasts that were always, kind of always setting out kind of near the end game there, and then they show up and it's like, oh crap, stuff just got serious. They've got Master in their name, and that dude's got fancy armor and everything. They must be able to back it up. And with Swordmasters, they were always the evasive and hard-hitting one, but they kind of sucked against casters. But then you have your Dragoons who are always just like the friggin' Mega Knights and all that kind of thing. And actually, there were a few requests from people to see Dragoons made back into that role, but it more or less wouldn't exactly work, just because the way that the classes are laid out, they have to have some downsides to them. So on the one hand, it kind of makes sense that they're the Monster Slayer kind of guy. Either way, this version's a bit more workable in OV and all that kind of thing. Funnily enough, it's still one of my favorite classes in the base game, but then again, I also just have a massive bias towards spears, so there's also that. Now, ultimately, the route that ended up working for this particular map was just to take the northern route, essentially just kite everybody going all the way up there. Finally ended up getting a bag, and once we got to that corner, ended up finishing everybody else off. Definitely would not recommend this skip. If you're doing a solo run, it definitely wasn't worth the amount of time that it took. The long and short of it is that it was a 2.5 hour grind going through Rampa and Tynemouth over and over again, and this was really the only real difference as far as the route went. Went through just collecting materials, collecting levels, getting stats, all that kind of thing. A lot of the solo run did involve around just maxing out the character as early as possible, and that's actually one of those bits, which I guess minor update. One vision might be possible. I found another route recently, and and it looks like it might be a bit more interesting of a route than just maxing out the character. But anyway, moving on to the next part. So I should take a quick second here also to apologize for the cursor on screen. This is the second time it happened in the run, and yeah, it's not supposed to be there. I'm sorry. Just, yeah, back when I was first recording the first few chunks of this, because I literally just kind of like sat down for like 10-something hours or whatever during the night, and was like, okay, screw it, we're just barreling through this mess. And I was actually expecting to get all the way through Chapter 4 and everything in one night, which was a bit naive. But anyhow, as you can see, this map is normally a little bit of a challenge, but even with only one guy, we're just barreling straight through this. Most smaller weapons and things like that have no effect. Most of the zombies are just folding over, and yeah, even with just a spear, we're doing wonders here. So this is kind of when it starts getting seriously into the spear side of things. Finally starts being a respectable weapon and all that kind of thing. I ended up upgrading to the Scorpion Plus over the course of that whole grind session. And yeah. It's definitely one of my favorites, though it's kind of disappointing that it doesn't end up lasting into the end game. I considered trying it for a little while, but it's just the penetration of it's just not there. You need a pretty reasonably high attack to be able to make it through a solo run, and it's weird because when it comes to the Scorpion, it specifically just seems to have lower armor penetration than its numbers even say. I don't know if anybody else has had this particular thing, but compared to the Trident, it's only a few points off, and all of its other numbers are relatively similar, so I'm not really sure why it feels like it's got so much lower of an effect on it. I don't know, maybe that's just disappointment bias and that I want to see it used more often, but either way, anytime there's a game with a poison spear, I end up using it. Even, like, I was mentioning it last time, but friggin' RuneScape, though, like, friggin' poison spears were absolute trash in that one, and I still ended up using them. Just kind of on principle there. But, yeah, funnily enough, they even tried to buff them by giving a unique type of poison that just was the best poison in the game. It didn't even matter. People didn't really care that much. It was like, you had your options of, like, you can get a shield and you'll get a crap ton of defense, and you got your one-handed options that are some of the most practical stuff you can get, and some of the fastest options you can get. Then they're like, okay, but what if you take a two-handed thing, take away all the hitting power of a two-hander, take away all of the range bonuses of a halberd, go ahead and take away the the long-range shooting of most of your ranged options, and then you give it 3 attack types, all of which are absolute trash and can't get through anything. Like pretty much at every single tier, it is exactly not enough to do the job. I'm not sure why they went about it that way, but whatever. Like, I guess part of its whole idea was that you would be traveling around and you would need different damage types against certain things, but then that mechanic never got quite fleshed out. But yeah. And they're like, okay, you need to go through this really difficult story, this really difficult quest thingy here to get a jellyfish poison for it, and then you can no longer trade it. Yeah, and then they're also really difficult to get a hold of because you couldn't make them until really late into the game's lifespan. It's like, man, what does so many games have against spears? But okay, anyway, back on track here. So the reason I'm going off on a tangent here is there really is not much to this fight in a solo run. It's literally just sit here and plow through everything, because at this point he's got Dragon Slayer on him, I believe. Yeah, I'm fairly certain he's running Dragoon at this point. I tried running this with Fencer during that whole grind session there, and yeah, even despite being a higher level, it just wasn't going to happen. It's just the Rune Fencer's innate defenses are pretty crappy. So yeah, just went ahead and barreled on through here as you do. It's kind of that point where I started regretting not having TP plus, but that'll end up getting remedied over time. Actually, it's funny because TP plus is one of those moves that ends up being seen as worthless by a lot of folks on their first time around, but it's really one of the strongest skills in the game, in both versions, really. Just because, if you didn't know, the whole reason that you'd want to use it is for any damage scaling finisher, which is a good half or more of them. And yeah, the way that it works though is past 200, its scaling works differently. So you start getting about, like, give or take 1 extra point of attack per TP. This varies, but some of them scale more than others. but this is kind of what leads to some of the insane damage you can end up getting later. Now, even though Spiral Scourge is one of the moves that'll end up using pretty much the majority of this run, which is actually not even, it doesn't even get that kind of scaling, it's still something that's really, really strong. But yeah, so yeah, the accuracy scaling is basically just, it'll never miss. It's not terribly useful, to be honest. Like, even as soon as you hit 100 on it, you're pretty much always going to hit with those particular ones. There's some rare exceptions, but for the most part, it's just going to be 100% hit chance on most of those. Which, again, is one of those things that makes Spiral Scourge so ridiculous, because for some reason it gets a ton of extra attack on it. But then on top of that, it also never misses, and it's a multi-hit move. Which, funnily enough, despite being a multi-hit move, if something has evade on it, it'll still eat all 3 shots. Just because it still counts it as 1 instance of damage. Now, at this point I started getting a little bit worried as far as damage went, so I went ahead and started climbing up this mountain. You know, as you do, it started getting a little bit worried. You end up getting reinforcements here a good bit. I believe it's up to 7 units that can spawn in out of the remaining pool of available stuff there. If you didn't know, every single map has this sort of just like list of whatever can possibly spawn in that map. So that's how it decides how reinforcements ends up coming in. So every single one of them is individually put together. So for folks who are wondering why the latest OV updates take months to do, it's basically because of that, because he's going through all the different formations and stuff like that. So, like, first, just Mitsuno logic at its finest, really. Like, pretty much every game in the series, every single individual unit is just, like, individually placed there, with individual stats and individual items and individual growths and everything else. And all of them are, like, why would you go through all that extra effort, you know? Almost nothing is randomly spawned. Like, I think the highest extent of random spawning is literally just in the PSP remake, where they allowed equipment to be somewhat variable. Which the way that one works is it's based off whatever their preset is. So, for example, say they have the thing that says to maximize attack, then they'll go and stack everything that has an attack bonus that's preferable to them. So, like, say they're putting on gauntlets or putting on a helmet of a particular type that'll boost theirs, and usually it ends up being like armor and gauntlets for attack bonuses, or like leggings and armor or leggings and helmets and things like that for defensive ones. And that applies across both versions. Those trends tended to be there even before OV like fully committed to them. Alright, so moving on here. Still trying to fight off the top of this mountain here. Getting a few little bonuses. Didn't end up going for that card there because I figured all those tiles are blocked off. So for the time being, it didn't really make sense to go for it. Pardon the kind of rattling sound in the background. Our old dog finally remembered that his food is over there. Unfortunately, he's kind of getting on in years, so occasionally he just sort of forgets to eat his food. It's, well, definitely leaning towards the sad side of things, but anyhow, moving on here. So eventually we'll be getting off this mountain. It is a very, very long process. I actually ended up having to step away in the middle of this fight, because I ended up having to go deal with some work stuff. So I think any time now there's... Actually, no, I think it's after I got down to the bottom. There was a quick save while I stepped away. So yeah, just for the sake of disclaimer, the only time the quick saves are used over the course of this run is whenever I had to step away and go handle something. Simply because, like, while I could go for this whole start and quit thing, which I usually did as a backup anyway, just for the sake of convenience, it's usually easier to just kind of hop right back into it. So there we go. That's rank 3. So we end up getting our next move there. I'm not gonna end up using that one too much. But yeah, Spiral Scourge, the one that's at 8, is the one that we want. It's probably the most deserved final rank move in the game. So yeah, here was the part that was a bit of a bummer. That despite everything, they ended up getting through all those defenses and everything else. So then I realized, oh crap, the last save was before those. Was before that part. I was like, okay, whatever, screw it. We're just moving on here. We're gonna go about this a completely different way. So then I went right back to Tinemouth for a while. As you do. because, you know, of course, we gotta have more and more Time Mouth. So we're actually gonna skip forward about another 10 minutes here, one moment. Alright, and away we go. So this is about 3, 4 something Time Mouth fights later. Went through and power grinded as you do. Still haven't noticed that dang cursor on screen. I cannot apologize enough for that one. That just shouldn't be there. Anyhow, so yeah, this time around went for X's and things like that. So, hang on, where are my fencers? So my fencers are 19, Dragoons are 22 now. I believe I actually went in for an extra level there on them. Either way, still very, very over-leveled for the purposes of this fight. And it's actually funny because it really past 15, a lot of the level differences start dropping off until you end up getting into about the more or less like 8 or more category. Like, I can't even tell you the number of times over the years that I've run into folks that are like, oh, you know, I want to go try out San Bronsa, but it's literally uncompletable. Everybody turns into level 40 and I'm only at 20. It's like, yeah, I'm not really sure why they did it that way, but that's just kind of how that goes. Come to think of it, I wonder if there was just some kind of Alright, so now we're moving on to round 2 of this particular situation here. So, as you can probably guess, it's going to be a good bit easier this time, since we got a whole bunch of extra stats that went in, got a whole bunch of better skills and all that kind of stuff. And bear in mind, we haven't even really started scratching the surface of the truly scary scaling stuff yet. Like, that'll be after Chapter 4. Like, it's just hilarious how all that stuff remained in the game, but either way, it's an interesting journey all the same, just to see how many stacks of different stuff you can get. Now, I will note at this point that even on this map, even in these particular situations, it's just not really worth picking up Draconology, which is a shame. It's one of those things that I really would have expected to see more of, given how much detail went into other portions. But if you didn't know, well, I discussed this earlier, but as far as the racial skills go, it's pretty much anytime you have an interaction with a particular, like, whatever your person happens to be, well, shall we say, judgy against, for lack of a better term. And actually, I think the main difference in this particular fight is I forgot to pick up Dragon Slayer last time. But anyway, so whatever your person has a racial skill against, they just end up getting about 5% of a bonus per rank, scaling on top of everything else. And this also applies to recruits and things like that, per rank that you get there. And I don't know why I turned on Dragon Slayer twice there, but oh well. You can't really stack it twice, but you can go for double dragons like that. As per usual, facing towards the cards, hoping that they don't run up and take them. Sometimes they'll do it anyway, just to be dicks, but that's the AI for you. At any rate, so like right there, he ended up blocking an arrow, and so he ended up getting that card stolen. Pretty annoying, especially when you're trying to stack as many of those as possible, but oh well. That guy's just going to go ahead and expire off in the background, and it is a little bit hilarious how much this is not going well for them. Now, okay, so yeah, as far as those racial bonuses go, the problem is, in the base game, they all trained at the exact same rate. So if you're wondering why they're more useful in OV, it's literally just that they end up training about, like, 7 to 12 times faster. And in that one, they more or less scaled it based off of how rare a particular thing is. So, for example, like, divine units, how often are you going to be frickin' fighting fairies and angels and crap? It's just... You could literally have that skill on the entirety of vanilla, and it's questionable whether you'd even make it a quarter of the way to level 2. Like, even with excessive grinding. It's bizarre why they thought that was a good way to do it. So yeah, at most you're getting like a 5% bonus, which, even going through San Bronsa, like, every other thing is a divine unit there, and still, it isn't worth it. So yeah, actually, I think the only, if I recall correctly, the only way to actually get a Sacrology bonus is to get a New Game Plus Denalto, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken on that. It's one of those cases where, realistically, you probably still have your original version, but if you went back, they've got some additional skills on them and stuff like that. Though, funnily enough, you can essentially just kill off your old version, pick up the new one, get their new skills, transfer the old skills back into them. But usually that's not worth it because they picked up a lot of base stats along the way. But yeah, anyhow, it's a complete and utter curb stomp this time. It's just not even funny. As he's just sitting there parrying 100% like it's nothing. It's nice. It's really nice when Deflect starts working. Actually, so I know I keep going on about OV on a friggin' vanilla run. And yeah, there's that that pause I was talking about, that I was remembering from last time because I had to step away for a bit. So yeah, ignore the load state, save state kind of thing. It's just easier. It's just so much easier. Anywho, so what I was saying about OV there. So the nice thing about all those stacking bonuses and everything else is essentially the parry bonuses in that one. Because in vanilla it's all about deflect, because most of your damage is going to be coming in from those ranged units. Casters you can eventually just nullify. Melee units, most of the time you can just stay away from them or just evade them entirely. Or in a lot of cases their damage just doesn't even matter. It's really only like the hammer guys that are much of a threat for most of the run. But in OV, obviously that's a bit of a different story, because all your melee units can move much farther, not to mention they end up hitting much harder. Not to mention your abilities to avoid them and or stack crazy amounts of damage are far fewer. Well, I guess it's not fewer, but they're more difficult to pull off, let's put it that way. So recently I kept routing through over and over, trying to find a good way to make that run happen, because the main limitation that I kept running into over and over is just the fact that around level 20-ish, you end up, if you end up only having one class that's all the way up there, you're more or less screwed, because you would end up over-leveling through the story, as you would expect that from vanilla too. I was expecting, like, my first attempt was just to try to power through it, just going full bore. Now, that didn't exactly work out, so second option was to try and, power level through the story with 2 or 3 classes, which kind of works, except surprisingly, even with like a 10 level bonus, the actual differences in abilities between them does not matter nearly as much as even a couple ranks of proficiency. So yeah, it's very rare that that there's enough of a gap in levels to actually fully carry a fight. And on top of that, you can't really grind Timemouth too well before actually having everything maxed out. So finally, I found a route that seemed like it's the way to go. And funnily enough, it finally gives an excuse to route in the neutral story. So I was pretty glad about that, because it essentially allows for getting a really, well, basically the maximum upgraded weapon type that I was going for. So I was essentially going for ridiculously overscaled two-handers, more or less. And yeah, that works, kind of. Because here's the thing, the way that they're balanced in that one, it's not enough damage. Like, the regular hits will never be enough damage to just one-shot somebody. It'll do, like, maybe 60% or so. And this is, like, with crits and whatever else. So, at first I thought, okay, go for a crit build, going for multiple hits. Because I wanted something that would be able to just, like, go in and, like, take out the smaller ones, then chip away the bigger ones. But then it never had... that build was having issues with its kind of, like, one-shot potential. So ultimately what I went for, and what seems to be working so far, I have it routed up to about Chapter 4, and we'll see if I need to do anything else beyond that, or if it's still possible beyond that, but either way. So, like, up until Chapter 4, essentially I was doing a thing where if there's a fight that can be finished quickly, it would be done with a Terror Knight. If there's a fight that needs a bit more longevity, it would be done with a Warrior, because they're the only ones that get access to a healing item of the classes that can use a two-hander, aside from a Lord. Now, leveling up those other classes is a little bit of a tough sell in some cases. It's possible for some of them, but for the most part, the idea is to actually just use whatever base level stuff is available to all of them. So that means that he can unlock all magic types and stuff like that. But for the most part, they're going to be a straight melee fighter. Now, the thing was, the Lord in particular has a really difficult time with one-shotting anything. His stats are very average across the board, so yeah, that was kind of their thing. They needed something to give them a bit of oomph. So what I was thinking was that they would go get what the hell's it called? Friggin' basic wind sword. The Gilgamesh, there we go. So I was looking for the Gilgamesh and was looking for the Rune Blade. I was thinking, okay, maybe if I get Dive Old to that particular level, get him leveled up exactly enough, so like 28 for the Gilgamesh, that's the exact level it unlocks. It's technically considered a heavier variant, so that would essentially mean that he's getting all that bonus damage. He's getting he's getting the wind scaling if I go for air augments, and yeah, it's just basically a build just entirely going for Sonic Blade insta-kills, which it could do, except the Gilgamesh does not show up in that particular pool. As far as the items that the units can spawn with when you end up recruiting them, it seems to be the same as the regular drop pool. So essentially getting those two in particular, actually, I think it's only those two now that I think about it, but it's only stuff that's in the Blade crafting book that can be dropped. So that ended up not being a viable route. However, he can still get, I think it was not the Rampaya, what's the other one? Friggin' Lightning one. Because, if you didn't know, in OV, all finishers were given an elemental scaling option. Which, again, varies strength depending on what's going on there. Now, for the two-handers in particular, you've got two that are particularly useful. So Sonic Blade's your main one. It's one of the highest hitting moves in the game. And so there we go. That finally Monster Mountain's dealt with. But yeah, so it's one of the highest hitting moves in the game. But by itself, it's only going to do about 80% damage most of the time. If you get proficiencies all the way up, like just going there. If you get an air augment on there, you're getting about 5% extra per rank, and then if you end up getting a strengthen and a breach on the other guy, then in a lot of cases that can be enough to do in many of the bosses. And funnily enough, healers in this case stop being an issue because of well, obviously stuff's just going down right away, but they start being an issue because of Dispel. Because they'll essentially just come in and undo any debuffs or any buffs that you've put on yourself, and so that gets to be annoying. On top of that, Poison, which used to do a crap load of damage, now does weaken, so it's a case where ultimately there needs to be a very specific collection of abilities put in place. So he needs the dances from the Swordmaster to be able to put out multiple buffs at the same time. Needs elemental scaling for the two-hander finishers. Needs a method of training those effectively, because so far, about reaching Chapter 4, he's still just barely shy of a rank 2 Wind Augment, and that's one that's been used the most. The second most useful one is Grand Cross there, which does an absolute crapload, like barely under what Sonic Blade does, but it has a massive AoE. Which yeah, it's very, very, very good, but a bit more situational. So those are the two kind of main bread and butter ones. You've also got Cupid Belt for kind of a shutdown type move, though. Truth be told, aside from like the Vice fight and stuff like that, I haven't really seen a whole lot of use for it. At least for a solo run. That's really one of those... The purpose of that particular move is whenever you have a two-hander user, they won't be able to actually finish any units off, but you need to have them delay two guys that are standing next to each other. So for that, it does its job really well, but in a solo run, it won't really matter because they'll end up resetting at about the same rate anyway. And the third one is kind of your snipe move, so that's your Thunder Beast. So that one's useful if there's a squishy in the back row or something like that. So particularly, I found it useful during the Prime fight, because there's a couple casters that like to come up and hang out right in the middle of the map, and you can actually snipe them through the walls and everything using that. So it's viable. Like, the thing is, the run is viable. There's so many steps to it, though. So I've been having a crap load of fun just trying to wrap that all out. Like, most of this vanilla run was just like, get stats, get items, grind real good, and then crush everything. And then going through OV has been just a puzzle. It's been an absolute puzzle, and I love it. It's like, that kind of stuff is absolutely my jam. So yeah, excited to see how that'll work out. And yeah, then Hobrim gets himself killed right away, as he does, because Swordmasters aren't very good. At least not in this one. In the OV run, I'm still kind of considering whether they'll be super viable or not. Like, I know I need the dances because it's got the double buff type thing going on, and potentially Mass Charm if I can end up routing that in somehow. Like, that would be a game changer right there. It's like, get completely covered in units, preempt everyone, do like essentially do like a mass charm type thing. They all start fighting, then finish them off the Grand Cross. Like, that's pretty brutal right there. It could be something. It could be something. We'll see. Ultimately, I've been saying that that runs more or less just like turn-based Dark Souls at this point. So we'll see how it goes. So yeah, currently we're just plowing straight through the story. They don't really have much of a choice, or much of a chance here. You need about 3 or 4 levels to have a massive advantage. He's got about 10. It's fine. Okay, I'm sorry, he's got 8. It's still more than enough. Ah, delicious coffee. You make joy happen in my brain. Alright, also, since ultimately it ends up getting asked every time, yes, hiatus is still on for the time being, and might end up being a bit longer. Long story. The usual folks that end up asking already know why. Yeah. It's life being life, let's put it that way. Though, I will say, was pretty annoyed the other day. So, we've been trying to find a house for the longest time. Like, whether to rent or buy, we've been trying to find, just a roof of our own without having neighbors sounding like they're a dang rhinoceros upstairs and stuff like that. Since we got a bunch of dude bro stoners that moved in above us. Like, I kid you not, they're throwing beer cans out the dang window. They essentially use the bathroom vent to funnel their pot smell down into the other apartments, because apparently they think that nobody notices. And then, yeah, it literally sounds like somebody's running a dang UFC ring upstairs. But anyhow, so there was an opening that we saw. So if you didn't know, like, the area that we live is a completely ridiculous seller market. Like, to the point where realtors don't even bother calling everyone back, and which is, I'm pretty sure that's even in their job description, that they literally have to call everyone back. But yeah, it doesn't even friggin' matter, because there's just so many people coming in that they can just do whatever, and their job will do itself. In most cases, stuff sold long before anyone even has to start looking for it. It's usually sold before it even ends up getting on any kind of listings or anything. And so there was one out of, I believe, 40 that we had sent out applications to. As far as ones that seemed like it would be a good, financial move. It seemed like it would be cheaper for us overall. We'd have a hell of a lot more space. We'd have a backyard for the dogs. And pretty darn fantastic. To continue the story, end up going and we end up looking through, liking the place. Oof, that horrible lag going on. So we end up going, filing our applications and everything else, paying for all the background checks and everything. And yeah, then I'm calling the guy back a week later, because I keep texting him asking for updates, and there's just nothing, and he's saying he's sending stuff over. Pardon the cough, sorry. So yeah, like, wondering what the hell's going on here. So next we get the Mercury fight. Whether this guy's a reference to Freddie Mercury or not is up to you. Pretty much another straight curb stomp here. Literally all this fight consists of is just holding off in the front until Mercury runs up and gets himself killed. Like, there's just no reason for him to run forward. If he stayed back there, this might actually be difficult. So, anywho, so I keep going and, expecting an update, because he's sending me these texts that, the paperwork went out, everything's all good, everybody's moving forward. Like, I haven't received anything. Where is it? No, I totally sent it. Find out about a week into this that he thinks he's talking to somebody completely different. And yeah, like, the guy is literally selling multiple things without even talking to the right people. He's friggin' showing up to appointments half an hour late. Like, it's the easiest job in the world for them right now. So yeah, ultimately, I found out that, he never even bothered submitting the paperwork, but he doesn't want to talk about it after that. It's like, no, they just totally found somebody else. I definitely submitted it after he already admitted it that he, never actually submitted anything. So yeah, that's the kind of situation that we're dealing with there. That's, this stuff's going so well for a very select group of people here that, like, they can literally just do nothing and still do their job. That is such a good position to be in. So if anyone happens to be a realtor, just Michigan, certain bits in some of the bigger cities in Michigan, definitely your place to be, especially Grand Rapids. But yeah, pardon the cough. If you're wondering why it took so long to get part 4 out, that's one of the reasons. I had 2 colds in a row, so that was absolutely wonderful. Always wonderful. So yeah, even with a frighten here, it's almost enough to finish him off. But yeah, a crit was enough to do the job. Through a frighten, without even a strength in place there. Like, God, you can get so ridiculously strong in vanilla. It's just jokes at this point. It's just going along poking stuff with a stick and it explodes. Funny stuff, funny stuff. And yeah, you know, really that's one of those things that just always kind of did it for me nostalgia-wise with RuneScape there. I always wished a strategy game would copy that system that they used. Whether it works out or not, it's just something that I think would have been interesting. I regularly post about this, and I think after I do this, I'm going to go post over to see if any developers might be listening over in the SRPG Reddit there, because. Okay, so if you didn't know the system in that game, the idea is that armor doesn't really reduce damage, so to speak. It just reduces your chance of getting hit by a particular thing. So, for example, like the standard setup a lot of people used was like just like full plate with like a 2-hander for free-to-play type characters. Later on, you ended up seeing a lot of like what would you even call it? It was like basically full plate that rotted away, more or less, because the stuff was old as hell. But anyway, like shield and dagger, all that kind of thing. More often than not, you saw folks just stacking as many plates on themselves as possible to defend against just like one particular type of damage. And yeah, it was interesting because it created a situation where, yeah, even a character in the best armor or whatever else could, in theory, be hit by the lowest level character around. The odds would be pretty low, but it's there. And as you see, even Oz here doesn't really stand much of a chance. Just like, I don't get it. This armor did nothing. But yeah, so that's always been my favorite armor system. Well, okay. I guess the most satisfying feeling was probably the one from New Vegas, in my personal opinion. Just because it always felt really good, like when you had armor that was just barely, enough to cover something. Like I was watching a run recently by MATN, if anybody watches him. That was going through, and it was walked into a place where he pissed off a bunch. Or no, it was Mitten Squad. That's who was doing it. MATN was doing a different one. But it was essentially, wait, was it him? No, hang on. Yeah, no. It was, it definitely was Mitten Squad for that one. A lot of folks that do New Vegas stuff have put stuff out recently, because Obsidian's in the news again. But anyhow, they walk into a place with, like, full metal armor against laser pistols, which they're just, like, sitting in the middle of the room and all the shots are bouncing off, and it's like, oh man, this is so satisfying, though. It's just such a good feeling system. But no, the RuneScape system there, it was nice because it added this interesting tension that even with the best armor, there was always a chance that stuff would just get through with max damage. Because the way that it rolled was just, it was accuracy versus your defense against that particular thing, and then if it got through, it just rolled for damage. That was usually it. There were some instances where certain things would affect it a little bit. So, for example, you had this prayer system that would essentially reflect or reduce some of it by a certain amount. But generally speaking, it was just there to. That's more or less just how the system worked. So, in a lot of cases, like when you had stuff like 2-handers and stuff like that, they had a better chance of getting through. But the question isn't like, would you like to trade weight for whatever else? Which there was a weight system too. You could only run for short distances most of the time, which ended up adding this interesting strategic element to binds and things like that. But anyway, the interesting part was that, yeah, it was more the speed of whatever you're swinging around versus how much accuracy it gave you. So in a lot of cases, you ended up seeing folks use stuff like scimitars a whole bunch because they had just enough to be able to have a decent chance of getting through a lot of things, but were very, very fast. Or, for example, a favorite of pretty much everybody that was kind of just this standard dagger everybody carried around was the DDS there. there's just a poisonable dagger. It more or less could be swung around about 4 times in quick succession. So you would essentially throw out 2 specials, let it sit in the back pocket for a little bit, recharge, throw out another 2 specials a few seconds later, and yeah, it ended up working fantastically, and it gave this nice feeling where people were legitimately just like carrying around all kinds of different loadouts with them, because you had the system where you had 28 slots for whatever items you wanted, whether they're armor, whether it's a healing item, all items take a slot. So you'd see folks just like carrying around all kinds of different armor types with them, carrying around all kinds of different counters to different things, and it felt awesome. It's a system that really could have used more. It really would have been nice to see it in a strategy game, and yeah. If anybody here has ever tried it, hopefully they'd back me up on this, because it's the MMO part, sure, fine, but that armor system really would make for an amazing strategy game. Like, I'd love to see a thing where it's like, okay, you know, you shift your stance or shift your armor around, or like you specifically have a unit and you tell them, okay, like defend against this particular thing, and then anyway, I mean, I would think probably the closest then that we ever got to that sort of system would have been XCOM there. But anyhow, so yeah, one thing that comes up fairly often in this particular bit that I've seen frustrating some people, you can't actually get the Volcadius here. In like whether you come back New Game Plus or whatever else, you can't actually get it here. Just yeah, reason being that he just runs away. It's kind of annoying, but yeah, the only place you can get it is Coda. And so with that is the end of Chapter 3, and the start of the longest friggin' chapter in this. And oh boy, does it really take off from here. So this is kind of, I guess you could call it the end of the kind of playtime session of all this, because yeah, Chapter 4 is really where everything starts taking off. Where all the builds start finally coming together, where a lot of the stuff ends up being gotten. End up blazing through a lot of the main line of Chapter 4, because I didn't really feel the need to expand out. I will say one thing I should have done earlier. I guess ultimately it didn't matter too much, but one thing that I plan to do for the OV route for this is if you take the route left, the kind of in that top fight, there's one with 2 clerics, and one of them drops a ring that lets you fly, which that thing is, well, for the purposes of a solo thing, the ability to traverse terrain in such a manner is more or less needed, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, so that'll be the end of this part, so we'll just go ahead and wrap it up here. I don't think there was anything else I did here. I think I literally just sat here and the rest of it. And actually, to clarify one part I noticed earlier, was going on and on about stat stacking and that kind of thing. What I was specifically referring to on the OV side of things is parry. Like, for this one, it was deflect, but for parry for that one, like where you can go and get bonuses off of helmets and shields and all that kind of thing, you can end up stacking that really fast, which makes it go up really fast, which is really, really handy. But anyway, I just noticed I forgot to do that earlier, and I don't feel like finding that section again, so hopefully the next parts will be going up a little bit faster. But yeah, that is finally we're on to the real meaty bits now. So thank you for looking at this whole thing, and yeah, have a fantastic one. Take care.